Hello and welcome to the Crochet Cakes YouTube channel. Over the past several years, you've either seen me or heard me talk about crochet socks and how they differ from knit socks. But I've never actually done a proper crochet sock video. In fact, I haven't crocheted socks in over a year. So we're gonna change that today together. So if you've ever wanted to crochet socks, then this is the video for you. I've divided this crochet sock tutorial into two parts. This part one is kind of like an introduction to crochet socks. We're going to try and do a comprehensive guide to crochet socks so that you can make better informed decisions when it comes to your sock making. And then in part two, we will get to the actual crochet sock making part of this tutorial. If you see me staring a lot at the video screen at the camera, is because I've been having focusing issues with my camera. So I really hope that I am indeed in focus and I haven't gone all blurry, because sadly that is not something that can be fixed post-editing, or at least not with the current skill set that I possess. That is not something that I can fix post-editing. So as I said, this video is meant to help you dip your toes into the crochet sock making world. And trust me, there is a lot to learn and it might feel overwhelming, but I promise if you are like me, want to get started with that first crochet sock, you're gonna be good to go. Things that might help you along in your crochet sock making journey are the orchard slippers. So slippers and crochet socks, at least the way I've designed them, these have a very similar construction, and there is a whole separate tutorial on the crochet orchard slippers. I will link it in the description box for you, as well as in the iCard above. It really goes into the very basics of crochet sock making to make this slipper, and it also uses very bulky weight yarn. So if you're not ready to commit to a lighter weight yarn when it comes to crochet socks, this is your go-to. First off, let's get into anatomy of a sock. So as you can see on the screen, we have a diagram of what part makes up a sock. So if you can see, you have a cuff, you have a leg, you have a heel flap, sometimes you have a heel turn and a gusset. If you've ever knit socks, you might be familiar with those terms. And of course, we also have the foot and the toe. So these are the parts of a sock that you will find in most socks. If they're shorties, they may not include a cuff, or they might just include a very short cuff. Some socks, if they use thicker yarns, do not include a gusset. But for the most part, these are the basic parts of a sock. So of course, now that we're seeing that diagram, what we're talking about is a cuff. That is going to be the part that's going to help your sock stay on your leg. The leg part is of course the part of the sock that goes over your leg. What we have, the heel turn and the gusset, this is the area that goes of course over your heel, but also over the widest part of your foot, which tends to be the diagonal from your heel to the top of the foot. That is going to tend to be the widest part of your foot. Then of course we move on to the foot, which is where we're going to be, our foot is going to be laying for the most part, and the toe, which, self-explanatory. Now that we've gone a little bit over what the anatomy of a sock is, let's discuss sock construction techniques. There are several different ways, some very ingenious ways of crocheting socks. The ones we're going to review today are what I consider to be the most basic of sock constructions, just because I've come across them more often than not. So let's start with my preferred method of crocheting socks. My preferred method of crocheting socks is called the toe-up sock. And as the name suggests, toe-up socks, we start from the tip of the toe and we work our foot, then we crochet our heel. There's several different ways you can do that. What I like to do is always do a heel flap and turn, and then we work up the leg of the sock and we finally finish on the cuff. Now, the reverse is called the cuff down technique, where we start from the cuff, we work our leg, then we either leave the space to do an afterthought heel, a modified afterthought heel, or we crochet a heel, then a heel turn, heel flap, and we work our way down towards the toe, where we decrease to form the little tip of the toe. So both for toe-up socks and cuff-down socks, most of the sock is crocheted in the round. The exceptions to that are the heel flap, the heel turn, and of course the cuff. The cuff, you can use front post, back post, double crochets. I like to do the ribs where we work in the back loop only, and then we come back and we connect to the body of the sock. That's just my preferred method of doing cuffs. And of course you can also not do a cuff, just do a little closeout row, and you could even knit your cuff. I am a big fan of doing that. I am a big fan of just crocheting my sock and then knitting my cuff, because my knit cuff brings it in a little bit, because knit stitches are a little bit smaller than crochet, but it also has a lot more stretch in the cuff itself. Things to consider when we're getting started on our crochet sock journey. Number one, are we following a pattern? If we are following a pattern, the gauge is very, very, very important. Crochet socks are one of those things that are very finicky. And if you're a seasoned crocheter, or if you've tried using different yarn and hook sizes combinations, you know that our gauge can change just from switching the yarn that we're using, just from switching the hook brand that we're using, and of course temperament, all that stuff just affects our gauge. So I find following crochet sock patterns to be a little bit of a game, but a fun one, not like a frustrating one. When we're crocheting socks, typically what we're going to be using is fingering weight yarn or sock weight yarn. This is because we want a thin fabric. It's not a diss on crochet to say that crochet fabrics tend to be thicker than knit ones. So when we're crocheting a sock, we want to go for a fabric that has softness to it, that's not very stiff, and it has a little bit of give. In order to do that, we may use a fingering weight yarn combined with a 3mm crochet hook. For a crochet sock, I would not suggest going below a 2.75mm crochet hook. If you still haven't achieved gauged with a 2.75mm crochet hook, then instead of following the measurements suggested in the pattern, I suggest that you follow your own foot as a guide, and that is very easy to accomplish by combining stitch counts and foot measurements that the pattern should include. Now, if you've ever bought a Crochet Cakes sock pattern before, typically I always try to include a video tutorial on either the most complex part of the sock or the entire sock itself. I find that these are very helpful because sometimes there are some tips and tricks that we don't notice that we do as we write up our pattern, but if we do a video tutorial, we can kind of point out what those are. Also, if you're kind of interested in what other materials you can use to crochet socks, you can check out the video that I'm going to be including here and in the description box below, where I did a crochet sock experiment on using a sport weight wool bamboo blend to crochet up some socks. And let me tell you, I still use those socks. Those are one of my favorite socks to use with boots because they have a lot of softness to them. They do have a little bit of drape. So when I crochet them, I should have made my cuff smaller, but overall they are great socks and I'm still using them. They haven't broken and they haven't just stretched more than I thought they would. So I think it was a very fun experiment. And in that tutorial, or in that vlog, I used Galileo, which is a sport weight wool bamboo blend, as I said, and it is from the company We Crochet or Knit Picks. Speaking of working up socks and other yarns, for the tutorial, we are actually going to be using a worsted weight yarn. And that is because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing very clearly, but also I want you to have a little speedy make that you can feel encouraged to have finished the sock and have something that you can ideally wear. I'm not saying your first crochet sock will be perfect. Mine wasn't. I crocheted mine extremely long. I still use it to this day because I still actually own that crochet sock. It hasn't met the afterlife yet. Other things to consider when we're starting our crochet sock journey is measurements. Now, I've alluded to this before already, but measuring your foot is very, 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 very important. The way I like to go about it is if you live with someone else or you can have someone come over that doesn't have, weird foot phobia or anything like that, I suggest laying a piece of paper down on the floor, standing up over it, and have the person trace your foot. And then from there, you measure the length of your foot, and also the width of, for example, your toes. And after you have that written down, kind of like a little, what do you call that? Template? Yeah, a template. Then I would suggest measuring the widest part of your foot, which will typically be the measurement from this gusset. So from the ankle to the heel. The sock needs to stretch over this, but also then shrink down to your leg. So that is what makes crocheting socks a little bit difficult, because as we know, crochet tends to stretch lengthwise, not widthwise. It does have a little bit of give widthwise, but mostly we see it stretch lengthwise. So it is. This also depends on your stitch combination. Some stitches just have more give than others. For example, lacy stitches. So in that sense, knit socks are just easier because knitting tends to stretch widthwise. That is not to say that crochet socks are not just as lovely, they are not just as usable. No. I have a lot of crochet socks that I use, I'm not gonna say daily because I don't, oops, did I kick the camera? I have a lot of crochet socks that I use, not daily because I don't wear socks daily, but you know, on a regular basis. Now these measurements that I will be listing for you on the screen are very, very important because they will help you kind of play around with crochet sock instructions to get a sock that actually fits your foot. And we get this by combining stitch counts and desired sock measurements that are going to be listed in the pattern you're making. What do I mean by desired sock measurements? When we are crocheting socks, we start with our foot measurement, right? But as we mentioned, crochet stretches lengthwise. So in order to have a sock that actually fits the length of our foot, we need to work our sock to be 1 to 1.25 inches less than our foot length. And that is what I call the desired sock length, which would be, again, 1 inch to 1.25 inches less than your foot length. So in my case, my foot measures 9.75 inches. My desired sock length is actually 8.5 inches. And that 8.5 inches is measured from the toe all the way to that heel flap, because this is the part that goes under our heel, this is the part that goes over our heel. Some literature that I recommend that you read on crochet socks, I do have a blog post about it that I like to think is a good introduction to understanding crochet socks, but also step into crochet. I know a lot of people have issues with this book, but I found it to be very, very helpful. He goes over the measurements that you need in greater detail and the why of them. So this is a step into crochet book. I've actually made 2 or 3 sock patterns from this, and I have no regrets. We had to pause because a plane was going overhead. So let's do a recap. On the list of important things to know when crocheting socks is definitely your measurements. Now, I'm going to include again a list here of the measurements that you should be taking when you're going to get ready to crochet a sock. These measurements will not only help you learn your foot better, but they will also help you decide which size of sock you're going to be making if you're following along in a pattern. So remember that from your foot length, we're going to subtract 1 to 1.25 inches. We want our length to have a negative ease because then it'll stretch nicely to fit over our sock. But another thing that we need to consider is the widest part of our foot, because the sock needs to stretch to go over that wide part. So sometimes a pattern will include a gusset. Now, a gusset is an area where we are going to be increasing our stitches just so that they fit over the widest part of our foot. Then we're going to be decreasing that when we get to the leg so that the sock stays on the leg. I know, this might sound a little confusing now, but I promise that once we get to the tutorial, it's not going to be confusing. Or at least I hope that I've done a good enough job explaining that you won't find it confusing. Another measurement that we're going to be using is the total foot circumference. That typically when we're creating a pattern tends to be just your foot, the total circumference of your foot. And that is because sock patterns, just like garment patterns, tend to use your average foot sizes as a guide, but just like with bodies, feet are different. Sometimes we have a high arch, sometimes we have flat feet, and sometimes we have a very wide leg but a very narrow foot. So all these are things that we need to consider when we're going to be crocheting a sock. And it may sound daunting, but with all these measurements, you're going to get to learn your foot pretty well and be able to crochet your perfect pair of socks. Am I guaranteeing that we're going to be crocheting the perfect pair of socks for us the very first time we crochet? No, And that is okay, because we are learning, we are exploring. And as long as you keep good notes on, okay, so this didn't work for me because my foot is wider, but I have very narrow ankles, then we kind of know where we're going to proceed the next time we pick up a crochet sock pattern. And please always remember, as I said, you can combine stitch counts for larger sizes with feet length of smaller sizes. The goal here is to create a perfect sock for your foot. Now, with that intro, I hope that you are ready to begin your crochet sock journey. If you kind of want to venture straight on into the world of fingering weight socks, then I do have several sock patterns that you can choose from. Several of them are also free on the blog, so I will leave a link to that to my sock page in the description box below. And if you decide to purchase the PDF, those always include video tutorials as well as a PDF printout of understanding crochet socks. So now that I've just kind of bombarded you with all this crochet sock information, let's talk materials that we will need to crochet our own sock for this tutorial. Now, I am currently working up a sample of the sock that we're going to be completing together in this tutorial. And I'm working up a sample because I'm working up stitch counts, foot circumference, all those measurements that we talked about, okay? So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using Wool Ease Fair Isle yarn. Now, I had bought this yarn way back in the beginning of the year because I was intending to do a yarn review, but also because I wanted to crochet a sock with it for this tutorial. So we are fulfilling that. Do you need to use this exact same yarn? I would suggest you use at least Woolies, you know, maybe not Fair Isle, but at least Wool Ease, so that you have a similar fiber makeup and a similar thickness of yarn, because as I said, gauge is very important for crochet socks. Okay, so along with that, we're going to be using a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. In this case, I am using the dot hooks from We Crochet. We're also going to be needing a tape measure, a pair of scissors, stitch markers. Stitch markers are very, very important when we're crocheting socks, especially when we come upon the heel part of the sock. That being said, I hope that you gather all your materials and you join me next time for our actual crochet sock. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of crafty time with me today. I hope that you found this video interesting. Let me know if you've crocheted socks before and what you thought about them. I have to say that the first time I crocheted socks, I fell in love with them, but I stopped making them because I don't use them as often as I thought I would. And not because I gravitate towards commercial socks, because I actually only have 2 pairs of commercial socks. No, it's because I rarely use closed shoes that call for socks. I usually just use Toms, and those are just slip-ins that really you shouldn't have to wear socks with. So that is why I kind of stopped making crochet socks, but it's not because I love them any less. And I hope that with this video and with the sock that we'll be working up together, you also fall in love with crochet socks. Don't forget to check out the description box if you have any questions about the links or any of the materials that I talked about. They will be linked in there. And if you feel like purchasing the Step Into Crochet book, I will also include a link for that in the description box below. I think there is a Kindle edition of this book. I'm not sure if it's in print anymore because it was from Interweave magazine. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of crafty time with me today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!